change is real and a human-caused event? And why is such fundamental science still rejected by so many Americans? We'll find out right now here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. That's right, it's the voice of atheism in Florida, and your chance to insult an atheist for only $2. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. Step 1, the burning of fossil fuels, whether it's coal, wood, or oil, causes a chemical reaction that liberates carbon dioxide. Step 2, carbon dioxide is absorbed by the Earth's oceans and plant life and converted to oxygen until such an excess of CO2 is produced that it can't all be converted as quickly as it is generated. Step 3, since carbon dioxide in the atmosphere traps infrared heat, it directly causes the oceans and atmosphere to heat up, resulting in an increase in climate temperatures. Yet in spite of this simple and provable science, an alarming number of Americans still refuse to acknowledge that it's taking place as we witness annual record-breaking temperatures in both atmosphere and the oceans, and a steady increase in sea levels accompanied by melting glaciers and ice caps. To help us understand both the science and the reason we have so many doubters, we have in studio tonight one of our Atheists of Florida members, Jim Peterson, and our special guest, chair of the Tampa Bay group Sierra Club, Kent Bailey. Also, our regular color commentator and know-nothing know-it-all, Joe Reinhardt, and me, I'm Ed Golly.
That'll cost you $2.
How's my credit? Anyway, Kent, thank you very much for joining us
In God
tonight.
we trust.
Whenever I encounter climate change skeptics, some of them claim it's taking place so slowly that it's only an issue for future generations to deal with, while others claim the science is completely flawed or that it's simply not possible for human activity to affect the climate. Now, my conclusion is that they're pulling the covers over their heads and engaging in their denial for ulterior motives. And those could include their refusal to accept their participation in this event, or maybe their fear that the changes that need to be implemented in order to address and either stop or reverse the warming climate. So, Kent, tell us, why do we know the science is real, and why are so many still in denial about it?
Thank you, Ed. Well, ironically, one of the reasons we know that climate science is real, that the climate crisis is upon us, is from work done by the oil industry itself. Going back to the 40s and 50s, they were doing groundbreaking research into the history of the Earth's geology in order to better understand where they might find and extract mineral deposits. And in their studies of paleogeology, they began to realize that the Earth's sea level goes up and down on a fairly regular basis, and that it is, in fact, linked to CO2. And for a while there, they were actually promoting the idea that we needed to come to terms with sea level rise. Now, this is back in the 60s. In the 70s, they went mute publicly. And then in the 80s and through the 90s, they began to actively discourage the idea that climate change was being caused by the burning of fossil fuels, on the one hand, publicly, while privately, they were changing the engineering specifications for their own infrastructure. In other words, changing the height to which they built platforms for their sea level drilling to account for the same sea level rise that they were denying existed. The public doubt can be very simply explained this way. For at least the last 10 years, the fossil fuel industry has been spending $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year to corrupt public policy. They've engaged in a deliberate conspiracy to create confusion about climate reality, denial of the climate crisis, and delay on climate action. The externalized cost of fossil fuels according to researchers from the International Monetary Fund, actually eats up about 6.5% of the global GDP. It is $5.3 trillion a year of economic loss due to the impacts of climate change, crop losses, and health. 4.2 million people a year now are dying from air pollution alone due to fossil fuels.
So those 140 extra jobs building the pipeline aren't really balancing that out.
You know,
really,
the jobs is an interesting thing. To transition to renewable energy in Florida, which is going to come, will create 300,000 permanent new jobs. There are more people now working in the solar industry than there are in gas and oil combined. This is the future. It is going to happen. The fossil fuel industry knows that this is going to happen, and they're simply trying to push off the date when their product is no longer going to be marketable.
How greedy, how cynical, how hypocritical does one have to be to pursue a course that, again, penalizes their children and their own grandchildren?
I believe the scale that's used is dollars and cents, Joe. Any more questions?
They just can't seem to accept the idea that we all live downstream.
And actually, as I understand it, it was in the third week of Lyndon Johnson administration that he and his administration recognized this issue and brought it to the forefront and understood what was going to happen.
We've known for long enough to have avoided many of the consequences that we are going to see impacting us now. It's imagine if you're in a speeding car heading towards a brick wall. Now, if you start to slow down a half a mile before you get there, you can probably just pretty much coast and come to almost a stop. But if you wait until you're 50 yards or 50 feet, now you got to lock it up and do everything you can, and you're still going to have a certain amount of impact. We are going to experience impacts due to climate change. There's no way around that. But by acting now, we can avoid the most serious consequences, especially for our grandchildren and for their grandchildren.
And actually, the probability of great climate change was noted as early as 1895 by the Swedish scientist Arrhenius, who predicted that with his observation of the pollution of the air in Europe through the extensive burning of coal at the time and the beginning of the petroleum age, that it could potentially make the planet uninhabitable. And this was in 1895. And while that seems like a long time to us, it's actually the entire petroleum age, the age of the fossil fuels, has only come into existence since about the mid-1750s or so. And since then, of course, it got off to a slow start. But with the introduction of the internal combustion engine and the widespread use of petroleum, that's when we began to see that there was quite a lot of emissions, because the early engines had no controls whatsoever, and the early forms of gasoline and other fuels were not exactly the purest agents out there. So this has been going on for a long time and has added enormously to the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
May I ask, Kent, what is your opinion on the likelihood that we'll be able to get ourselves together, not just in the U.S., but globally, internationally, and actually come up with some effective plans and be able to effect those plans to curb, if not quell, the problem completely? Do you really think that we'll be able to do anything, or that Mother Nature will just do it for us?
I really am very optimistic about the future. The great thing about energy technology now is it's rapidly evolving. The cost of renewable energy right now today is the cheapest new source of energy available, bar none. The many developing countries are going to do with developing a grid what they did with developing their communication systems. In other words, they're not going to put telephone poles up and string wires to bring telephone service to people. They just went straight to cell towers. Developing economies now are going straight to renewable energy and microgrids, and they're not going to have a big centralized hub and spoke grid like we have here in the developed world. So I'm really very, very optimistic, A, that technology is going to bring the change that we need, and B, that because there's over 654 legal actions have been taken to date against the fossil fuel industry because of to recover damages from fossil fuel related climate change. The industry is pushing its way back at this. They're being pushed back.
But more because of economics than because of morality or ethics.
Follow the money. And
I have that written down right here. Follow the money.
The great thing about being in the Sierra Club today and working on this issue is there are lots of people who are going to do the right thing because they care about the planet, and then the rest of the people care about money. Some people, I'm kind of care about both. I enjoy. I love to have a nice, great organic meal and enjoy the outdoors, but still in all, we got to keep the lights on, have to pay the rent. It's going to be a great day to be around. Now, we do have a timeline that we have to follow. The best minds in climate science right now suggest that we have maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years to really embark on a kind of crash program that we have done in the past. It won't take anything more dramatic than what it took to put people on the moon. We need to mobilize similar to what we did to World War II. We just have to overcome these obstacles that have been erected by the industry, who are simply trying to protect their own vested interests, and there are no links to which they won't go.
Well, I suppose if we could make it more profitable for the Koch brothers to have solar power than to have fossil fuels, it might work. But again, I always like to trot out the trope that if you think we can solve this problem and that we can come together, even as diverse as we all are, and solve this problem, that you need to go look and count the trees on Easter Island. They knew for 100 years that they were running out of forest, that it was inevitable. And this is a homogeneous society that was easily governed, not one where you have to build a consensus. You just said do it or don't. And they couldn't stop. There are no trees on Easter Island. They may have planted some since they went extinct there, but when a homogeneous society who has a monolithic government and knows for a century that they're running out of their most essential raw material and can't stop, it doesn't bode well. Example.
The fossil fuel industry contributes $100 million each election cycle to fossil-friendly politicians. They also encourage primary challenges to anybody who begins to waver on their climate denial stance. Privately, there are dozens of representatives and senators in Washington, D.C., Republicans, who will tell you that, yes, they accept climate science. They know it to be true. As a matter of fact, I believe at one time Senator Marco Rubio from Florida and understood and accepted climate science and accepted the need to do something about it. And then when he ran for president, he sort of backpedaled on that a little bit. What we have to do is talk to our representatives. Let the senators and representatives know that the population, the people, understand this and that we want them to take action. They are scared to death of the right-wing, radical, religious opposition and the Koch brothers. They send money out and they send people out and they force these, they primary them out. This is what happens. They get a primary challenge. We had a congressman from South Carolina, Bill Inglis, lost his seat in 2010 with the Tea Party purge, and he said that there are lots of senators and representatives in his own party that want to take action on the climate, but they're terrified, quote, terrified, close quote, to do so.
441-3000. We'll get you into the conversation here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Our guest here on the Atheist Forum, Kent Bailey, who is the chair of the Sierra Club, the Tampa Bay group of the Sierra Club. And we're talking about climate change because as atheists, we know we can't pray our way out of this kind of a problem. Jim?
Yeah, I wanted to congratulate Joe on the point he made about the plight of the Easter Islanders. We're in the same position, which is basically what you were saying. And we become accustomed to certain ways of doing things, certain habits of mind and belief, and it's very difficult for us to break away from that. And so politicians and their sponsors who tend to benefit financially from the present arrangements will continue to experience great success unless we can get people to start their cognitive processing, start thinking again. That's the most fundamental challenge we have. We know we have problems. They're not only having to do with the climate, which is changing, but with food production, with changes in the ocean, with changes in the land in terms of topsoil erosion. I mean, and the overpopulation, which is the source of much of our problem, which again connects to certain kinds of belief systems, which specify you have to have as many children as possible.
Among other things, again, we talked about the early warnings. I think Malthus would be part of that group with his population warnings. But I also, you mentioned the religious contingent, and I think it's a significant number who believe either that the world's going to end within our lifetime or some very short period of time, or so it doesn't matter what we do with the earth in the meantime. We might as well use the resources, or that God would never permit the human beings to become extinct again or to become threatened as a species. And we know that for a fact because we have the rainbow as the evidence that he gave us that he would never again flood the earth or cause us all to be. Of course, he could, as I said earlier, winnow us down to as few as 9 people and then stave off extinction from there, if you're familiar with the story of Noah. So even religious believers ought to have some caution about what God's plan for the earth is, because their chances of being part of the lucky 9 are not that good either.
But somehow the people of the earth have managed to live on a planet with the prospect of total nuclear annihilation of our species and perhaps of life on the planet itself, easy enough to imagine, and that they've been able to accommodate themselves with that. So the prospect of a universal flood, which we know is just silly when you look at geology. Where did all the water go? That's that's one of the big problems, and there are many, many others. But these are beliefs rooted in basically a Bronze Age culture, and people generally, I don't think, give it a great deal of attention. But we still have the problem of people avoiding the symptoms, the consequences that we are beginning to know more and more. We see it every night on the daily news. So, Ken, what do you think? How can we motivate people? How can we help people to realize the seriousness of the dilemma with which we are faced?
It's very, very difficult to crack that wall where people erect a religious barrier against accepting climate science. One of the most outspoken climate deniers, Senator Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma, was on a Christian radio station promoting his book, The Greatest Hoax, How Global Warming Conspiracy Threatens Your Future. And Senator Inhofe said, and I quote, "God's still up there. The arrogance of people to think that we human beings would be able to change what he is doing in the climate is to me outrageous." That Senator Inhofe was awarded the Political Leadership on Climate Change Award in 2015 by the Heartland Institute and the Heritage Foundation for his work on climate denial.
Supplemented by Trump University, no doubt.
Yeah, no doubt.
And no, it's no coincidence that Scott Pruitt comes from Oklahoma also, is it?
I don't know what state James Watt was from, Watts, but he was the Secretary of the Interior under Reagan. He made the same statement that we didn't need to worry about the ecology or the earth, because the world was coming to an end in short order, and so we might as well use up all the trees and whatever else we could find in the meantime. Happily, he lost his job shortly thereafter for having said that.
Well, even though the oil industry likes to put money behind people that promote the idea that climate change either A, isn't happening, or B, if it is happening, it's not due to what human beings are not
Sure.
the driving force, or C, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. Even though that's their public stand, privately, as early as 1968, they received a report from their own scientists. This is the American Petroleum Institute. It was a report by Robinson and Robbins. And this is in 1968. Robinson and Robbins predicted that atmospheric CO2 would reach 370 parts per million by the year 2000, some 32 years in the future, and they hit it right on the head. The petroleum industry knew what was going on. They know what is going on. They continue to deny it, and they are doing it solely for the purpose of generating profits as long as they can. Now, a real cynic, of which I'm not one, might presume that they are looking at this as a kind of an end game, and that they want to gather up as much profits and as much wealth as they possibly can, with the idea that if they can make themselves that secure, their prodigy and themselves, their descendants, will be able to survive the coming apocalypse.
Yeah.
I think that's a very foolish idea, but, you know, greed has a way of messing people's head up.
It's a shame that we can't criminalize this activity, because if it's not assault, and it is under the law technically a form of assault, but to shorten the lives of millions, if not billions of people, is or ought to be a crime. I don't know whether it makes any difference that you strangle them to death with the bad air, or you just strangle them to death with a rope.
Well, the Attorney General of the state of New York is looking into exactly that.
Good for him.
He is investigating Exxon for possible corporate malfeasance and misleading the stockholders of Exxon about the impacts of climate change. And the period he is looking at is when Rex Tillerson was the CEO of Exxon. They have discovered some interesting emails and so forth. Rex Tillerson had an alias email account that was not registered his name. It was Wayne Tracker, I believe, was the alias. It's not important what the name was. I believe that's correct, though. And when the Attorney General of the State of New York subpoenaed the records from Exxon, those emails were not turned over, even though they were Rex Tillerson emails. And by the time the Attorney General discovered this omission, a routine maintenance program that runs on the corporate servers had erased 7 months of emails that were gone now, so we don't know what they were. But clearly, the possibility of criminal prosecution in addition to civil action, the 654 civil actions, is very real, because people are being damaged. And the legal test is this. Did you know what you were doing was likely to cause damage? When did you know it? Did you act to prevent it? And did you warn others of what was happening? And the fossil fuel industry appears to be culpable on all these counts.
The civil liabilities ought to be even greater and easier to enforce. I mean, look at after decades where the cigarette manufacturers never had to pay a dime, and they got sued about once an hour. But once the dam broke and they started being held culpable for false advertising and such, people have been able to collect hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the threat of jail and the threat of extremely large civil suits ought to get the attention of some of these deniers, at least some of the people who are professionally deniers.
You're listening to the Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Our special guest tonight, Kent Bailey from the Sierra Club. We're going to pause for a moment to tell you about Atheists of Florida. When we come back, we'll let Kent tell you a little bit about the Sierra Club, and we'll continue talking about climate change here on WTAN. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. 441-3000 if you'd like to join the conversation. Kent, tell us a little bit about the Sierra Club and how some of our listeners might see more about what the club is doing and how it's reacting to these issues and how they might join if they're interested.
Thanks, Ed. Yes, the Sierra Club is the world's oldest and largest environmental organization, founded by John Muir, who was in California trying to save a sister valley of the Yosemite Valley called the Hitch Hitchy Valley. We meet monthly in Tampa at the Seminole Heights Branch Library on 4711 Central Avenue there in Tampa. We have a social time at 6:30, and then we get going at 7 o'clock with our program, always on the second Wednesday of each month. The program this month that's coming up will be on the native birds of Florida, that are birds that are endemic to Florida, limited to Florida, special Florida birds in particular. We also have an extensive outings program. John Muir founded the club with the idea that, and this was well over 100 years ago, that you had to get people out into the wilderness for them to understand what was at stake and to appreciate the beauty and value of the natural world. This was, of course, we didn't have paved roads. We didn't have the national park system that we have now. Certainly didn't have PBS TV, show you specials about what's going on. So they developed the concept of outings to take people out into the natural world. John Muir was something of a visionary as a conservationist. He came to Florida 150 years ago this year, walking from his home state in Indiana, I believe. He got to Savannah, came across Florida from Fernandina Beach to Cypress Key. At Cypress Key, he was delayed for a while. Apparently, he had contracted typhoid malaria in Georgia while sleeping in a cemetery. And there was a landmark tree on Cedar Key where he laid and recovered and had what was at that time a real epiphany. The idea that the natural world was not there for human beings to conquer and exploit, that actually human beings were a part of the natural world, and that we fit into the mosaic of the environment in our own way, and that the beauty and the natural wonder of the world had value all of its own, above and beyond what we could use it for.
So he was essentially rediscovering what the native populations had already known before Europeans got here. Let me ask you, do golf courses qualify as getting out in nature? Because I think our president might decide that.
About that.
Dan Quayle did. Sure. What do you want, Jim? Say something.
Well, I just want to point out that the idea that we don't own the natural world, again, runs afoul of religious belief, because they're pretty clear on the fact that human beings do hold dominion over the earth, and that the beasts of the earth and the assets of the earth are there for us to use and enjoy. I don't think there's any debate about that.
Well, actually, there is.
Not among Bible.
I wouldn't want to, at the risk of contradicting you, you know, in 2005, the National Association of Evangelicals was asked to consider a call for evangelical Christians, specifically, to protect God's creation and endorse the McCain-Lieberman cap-and-trade bill that was before the Congress in 2005. Now, in reaction to that, the fossil fuel industry, one of the groups that they fund is the Cornwall Alliance, and they became involved, and the National Association of Evangelicals vice president, who is Richard Cizik, C-I-Z-I-K,
Sure.
was forced to resign. Since then, The Cornwall Alliance has been something of an enforcer in the evangelical movement, smothering environmental sentiments in that community before they even have a chance to gain a following. The Cornwall Alliance published a anti-environmental manifesto in 2013 entitled Resisting the Green Dragon, which I suppose Sierra Club might be a part of. But nevertheless, there is a division and a growing movement among evangelical and other persons of faith, of all faiths, to recognize the value of the natural world and understand man's place in it as other than the dominionator.
Belatedly, then, if not.
It should also be observed that you don't have to go out into the swamps to appreciate nature. As Ed suggested, you could go out into a golf course. You could go out into your own lawn.
Yeah.
Look at what's happening there. Be sensitive to how plants and animals interact with each other, how plants grow. Learn a little bit. Do some research and study. Come to appreciate the beauty of the natural world.
Voltaire has the perfect quote on that particular point, and I think I'll take this opportunity to give us the quote of the evening. 2 quotes for the price of 1. The first from Voltaire, which is, "We must work in our own gardens," which is sort of the 17th, 18th century equivalent of think globally, act locally. The other quote is one that I, in all modesty, have to take credit for myself, which is simply, never practice moderation to excess. Good advice.
Yes.
I think we can all agree on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
How could you not?
I wanted to point out also that in case you're still unconvinced and need a historical reference, let me point out that on YouTube right now, you could look up a film that was done in 1958 for the Bell Telephone Science Hour. It was called Climate Change, interestingly enough. And even more interesting, they discuss at length the very things we've been talking about here. And this was in 1958, and they were concerned about the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the upper atmosphere, the effect that might have, and the danger that it might pose to civilization. So I think that this is a problem of long standing. It's not something that came up as some sort of a choice, fashionable item from, say, 2005 or something, just because Al Gore made a movie about it. No, its origins and these concerns arise from long before that. So I think
But then the skeptics point out that in the 70s, the climatologists were telling us we were headed for an ice age. And because they were wrong, we can now discredit anything they tell us.
Right.
Well, the climatologists...
They were lying. They weren't just wrong.
Weren't, as a group, saying that. A very small number of people wrote an article in Time magazine in 1978 advocating the position that a global... cold wave was due and that glaciation was going to occur at any moment. However, that obviously has been disproved. It was never scientifically validated at the time.
Well, Jim, if I may jump in.
Jump in, by all means.
Yes, sir. We're glad to have you.
Only since 1950 have human beings ever existed on a planet where the carbon dioxide was above 300 parts per million. It's now above 400 parts per million. In the long-standing cycle of freeze and thaw, we call the Earth the water planet. Actually, it would be more accurate to call it the ice planet. We have a cycle that runs about 120,000 years, 100,000 years of ice, followed by 20,000 years, roughly, it varies somewhat, of warming temperatures, during which the last 20,000 years we developed our agriculture, our civilization, and our technology, which gave us the ability to push the CO2 in the atmosphere up to 400 parts per million. We should be going into a period of global cooling. If not for the fact that we have added 130 parts per million of CO2 to the atmosphere, we probably would be going into a period of cooling, just like we have done over and over and over again for the last 2.5 million years. Unfortunately, we're doing something we've never done before to a planet, and nobody knows exactly how this is going to work out.
Well, of course, we do have the example of the planet Venus, which we contemplate to our considerable horror, whose atmosphere is dominated by carbon dioxide in the upper parts and methane, and whose surface temperature is about 900 degrees. Venus, it is thought by some geologists and planetary scientists, was once a planet much like the Earth. It may well have supported life in some form. But because of the nature of what happened to it, mostly because of volcanic activity, it's speculated, it's been converted into the hellhole it presently is. But we can see the causes of its condition as being an excess amount of carbon dioxide, which is precisely what we're doing to our planet. And we don't have to.
Except the skeptics are going to say there weren't anybody driving cars around or burning coal out there, right? So when they say, oh, this is just naturally happening and humans cannot possibly have any effect on it, that's the basis of their argument, right?
Well, 2.5 billion years of history.
Belie that.
Yes.
Right.
We know a lot more about our planet today in 2017 than we did even back in the 80s when Dr. James Hansen upset everybody in Washington by telling them in 1980 that the world would be exactly where it is today 30 years in advance. Dr. Hansen 2 years ago violated scientific protocols by releasing a report put together by his team of 14 climate scientists predicting 6 to 15 feet of sea level rise by the end of this century. That was very much outside the mainstream of scientific thought at that time. Since then, we've seen scientist after scientist after scientist step forward with ever more dire predictions of sea level rise. The rate of rise of sea level is changing so rapidly that science cannot hardly keep track of it.
Wow. You know, if we could see the rise in the water levels as an animation as opposed to just a number, I think it would have so much more productive effect on the viewer, because I have no idea what 6 feet of more water looks like. But when I look at and I see that it goes up to the 30th floor of the Empire State Building, now it has an effect on me far more graphic. Also, I think the idea that the the climate deniers are by and large conservatives. I think that's I don't know of any liberals who take that position, which raises the question, if they're not prepared to conserve the air, the water, and the earth, why the hell are they conservatives?
Or our species.
Well, the meaning of conservative has changed a lot since John Muir camped out with Teddy Roosevelt on the peaks of Yosemite, I can tell you that. The 6 feet of sea level rise, to give you some idea of what that would mean to Florida, would take 12.5% of our homes. 1 in 8 homes in Florida would be lost, according to the Zillow website, okay, scarcely a left-wing bastion of radical thought. $412 billion in lost real estate at today's prices. However, that being said, way ahead of that, as a matter of fact, starting probably with each one, if you have a homeowner's policy, be watching the mail, because after the most extreme rain event ever recorded in history hitting Texas and a storm coming up the spine of Florida, the longest lasting major storm ever recorded, followed by Maria hitting, 2017 was the first time in history mainland United States was hit by 2 storms, 2 major hurricanes in the same year. And believe me, the insurance industry knows this. So way ahead of the 6 feet of sea level rise taking your home, if you can't afford to pay those insurance premiums, or if you can't get insurance,
or if they don't pay off anyway,
you're in foreclosure. You got to pay principal, interest, taxes, and insurance.
And of course, out in California, the opposite issue will be getting fire insurance, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Or any type of insurance.
Well, then the problem becomes what am I going to do? I know I'll sell my house When the sea levels get and the flooding becomes obnoxious enough, I'll just sell my house and move to higher ground. Problem is, who's going to buy it?
What bank would mortgage it? Right?
And that's
right.
There is article out there that I read recently which talks about what it will look like if we allow things to progress to where the real estate market in Florida begins to fall apart. You'll see it it's happening now in some places. There was a homeowner in New Jersey that was featured on the news a while back. They can't sell, they're upside down on their mortgage, and they can't sell their house because it's in an area now that routinely floods. This is happening to homeowners on the southeast of Florida too. So, do you sell defensively? Get out quick while you still can. Do you wait until you get a little more equity in it? And nobody knows when it's going to happen. Will it be because we lose the ability to have a mortgage, whether we lose the ability to have insurance, or whether the bottom just falls out of the market? But it is a very real financial threat to Florida. We cannot afford to do nothing, and it's just a darn shame that when we've got the prospects of creating 300,000 new jobs, two-thirds of the solar industry jobs don't require a college degree. The average wage nationally for solar installers is $26 an hour. 28% of the workforce in the solar industry is female. 24% are minority, and 9% are veterans. These are exactly the kinds of jobs our economy needs to get going again, and it will save our planet. If we do in Florida, we should be leading the Bay Area, Tampa Bay area. And I've been checked on PolitiFact with this one, so I like to say it at every opportunity I can, because of the 10 cities in the world most threatened by sea level rise, 5 are in the United States, 2 are in Florida, and we are in one of them. Mm-hmm. We have more to lose than anybody. We should be leading the charge for renewable energy, leading the charge against carbon pollution. Florida yet remains one of the 4 states where you cannot do third-party sales of energy to the grid.
And here we have a governor who won't even allow government to acknowledge it or speak the words. It's
one thing you can be absolutely sure of when it comes to insurance companies, and that is that they will behave just like any mercenary, and that is that they are willing to die for you until there's a war.
Can you briefly explain? A lot of people, well, all of us have gone through a year in which it's been relatively dry. If you look at the paper, you see we've only accumulated less than 44 inches of rain, which is a small amount for this area. So where does all this excess water come from?
The excess water
for flooding.
Okay, well, over the short term, most of the water is coming from melting ice. California is losing their snow caps. There's glaciers there are no glaciers in Glacier National Park anymore. Okay, seriously, they're retreating all over the planet. This last summer, July, I believe it was, an iceberg fell off the Larsen shelf in Antarctica. I think it was 1 trillion point something tons, enough ice to cover the entire United States with 4.6 inches of ice. This is a big piece of ice.
Martini.
Greenland is losing ice more quickly than anyone thought was possible. That is what's causing most of the sea level rise now. But ultimately, about 75% of the sea level rise will be due to thermal expansion. Water it expands when it gets warmer. The oceans are heating up, and that will account for a very significant amount of the sea level rise.
This is true, and there's no escaping it. I mean, this is our only home, our only planet.
You know we're in trouble when Greenland starts to turn green.
And there are natural forces much larger than any power we can exercise that are working. And so the only thing we can do by way of countering it is to moderate our own behavior, which in this case involves the curtailment of the production of greenhouse gases.
Well, and again, if you know anything about addiction and rehab and that sort of thing, which is why I'm very pessimistic that it's really going to happen. So what I would entertain is a strategy or a good subject for a book, and that is how do I profit from the coming climate apocalypse? Where should I move? What kind of real estate should I be buying? Should I be investing in this construction company or that construction company? Should I be selling this particular stocks or whatever? So a strategy to profit from the coming catastrophe is what we need, because wasting our time trying to stave off the coming catastrophe isn't going to help.
Well, unfortunately, I don't imagine there's anybody listening to this broadcast that will be alive when the climate apocalypse finally unfolds. It's not the danger that we're going to wake up and suddenly be submerged, or wake up and suddenly have no food because of the climate has been disrupted to the point to where rains don't come when rains are supposed to come, floods come when not supposed to come. The danger is, and we probably have 2 or 3 years, and that's all, to make this change. We will reach a tipping point, a kind of point of no return. There are vast amounts of methane, in particular, and carbon dioxide that are captured and locked up in frozen tundra and in the oceans. And if we continue the way we're going, we will begin to release this. It will set in you reach a tipping point, a point of no return, a chain reaction. More and more greenhouse gases will get released, even if we stop burning all fossil fuels. That's the real danger, is that by the time we realize what we're doing, what we have done, we have reached that tipping point. Then you get into all sorts of exotic solutions that involve harvesting CO2 out of the atmosphere. These are very energy intensive and extremely expensive.
Just as a private individual, I mean, I'm a big fan when it comes to fight or flight. I'm into flight. First in flight. That's on my South Carolina, but it would be on my license plate. In any case, forget about the dollars and the business opportunities in real estate or stocks or whatever. How about a simple survival guide for the average slob who's not interested in the stock market or who's not into speculation, who just wants to make it through the week with him and his family still alive?
Well, if you're in the United States, you're in pretty good shape. If you're in Syria, not so much. A lot of people don't realize that the conflict in Syria originated as a climate disaster. The long-standing drought forced Syrian farmers off the land and into the cities, which brought them into conflict with the people who had different religious beliefs, and therein this caused the seeds of the Syrian civil war. The Pentagon has recognized climate change as a major threat to American security for decades now, and their concerns about it are getting even more heightened with each passing year. The prospects of massive famine, displacement due to sea level rise, but especially food insecurity. This is something that could bring Africa, Asia. We're going to see a lot of conflict there if we allow this to continue to unfold, and even in this hemisphere eventually.
So jumping out ship from the Paris Climate Accord sounds like it's one of the most catastrophic things we could do, because we are the nation that should be leading this charge instead of turning our back on it.
We have always been a leader in technology and economic development in the world, but unfortunately when it comes to renewable energy, the United States has ceded leadership to China, which is now developing and deploying more renewable energy technology than any country in the world.
The other thing I wanted to ask you to talk about is the rate of acceleration of the change, which I think is faster than what was predicted and increasing at a geometric progression.
It is astonishing. The NOAA website, which I checked just a couple of weeks ago, still says that sea level rise in Tampa Bay is rising about 1/8 of an inch per year. Actually, for the last several years, it's been rising at 3/4 of an inch per year.
Whoa.
That is based on the measurements from the St. Pete tide gauge. Now, on August the 9th of this year, Dr. Andrea Dutton from the University of Florida was on the front page of the New York Times reporting an average annual sea level rise of 0.89 inches per year, 4.5 inches over the last 5 years on the east coast of Florida and the southeast coast of the United States. The rate of acceleration is astonishing.
How old is that data?
That is for 2011 through 2016 inclusive.
It's not a prediction. It is what has
No, this
happened.
is a measurement.
This is the actual measurements.
Yes.
That
And
have
not a matter of
outpaced
belief.
outpaced the predictions radically.
You can ask the people at the Daytona Speedway how much their racing platform has diminished because of encroachments from the Atlantic.
I didn't realize that.
Dr. Harold Wanless, who's chair of the geology department at the University of Miami in April of this year, said that NOAA's high prediction, that, if you look at the NOAA chart, there's several lines there, different colors, says NOAA's high must now be regarded as the intermediate low. Dr. Wanless has predicted 10 to 30 feet of sea level rise by the end of this century.
Wow.
So my conclusion would be that as I look at all the cars driving around and airplanes still flying and coal still going, that we're just not going to be able to make the changes fast enough to really effectively arrest or retreat this.
Hello, Easter Island.
Yeah.
People crave normalcy. They want things to be quiet and have a normal and predictable life.
Right.
And unfortunately, we're living in a very dynamic era, whether we want it to be or not.
Well, the rest of the world is changing much more quickly than we are. They don't have a $250 billion profit. The fossil fuels make $250 billion a year in profits, of which they put only $1 billion a year into spreading misinformation to the citizens of the United States.
A real bargain.
What a buy.
But I think we're gonna surprise ourselves with our ability to adapt and change rapidly. It will happen politically. It's going to happen in Washington, D.C., and there's nothing anybody can. Once people's eyes are open to this, they are ready to act.
So we'll either be surprised by that or we'll be surprised by the water lapping at our front door.
All we have to do is wait.
That's it. Well, no, actually, we need to get out there and get active. That's why this program exists.
Well, we're down to about our final minute, Ken. If there's anything else you'd like to add that we haven't touched on, and you can talk fast, this is your opportunity.
25 words.
25 words or less. We're at a critical moment in our history. 100 years after the Titanic went down, the British Admiralty convened a new hearing on that. And what they discovered was that 30 seconds passed after the crew of the Titanic saw the iceberg before they acted. Ladies and gentlemen, folks out there, we are in that last 30 seconds. We have to change course, and we have to do it quickly.
Incredible. Well, thank you very much. Kent Bailey is our guest, and he is the chair of the Tampa Bay Group Sierra Club. And I'm sure you can find them on the internet if you'd like to learn more about them. Kent, here's my barber's card in case you're having trouble finding a guy with a pair of scissors and a barber chair here in town. But anyway, you just can't cover it all in an hour, and we'd love to have you back again because I'm sure there's a lot more that you can tell us about it and that we would like to hear, and I think our listeners would too. So that wraps it up for this edition of the Atheist Forum. Hope you'll join us again next week, along with Joe Reinhardt and Jim Peterson. I'm Ed Golly reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. Join us again next Sunday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.